All right, in this video, we're going to go over the second part of bird notes. So first up, we'll start with feeding. Birds will often eat often to generate heat. They're endothermic, so they maintain their own body temperature, but they need energy from food to help maintain that. Smaller birds tend to eat more often than larger ones, and obviously they're going to have beaks or bills, and they don't have any teeth. The beaks can tell us a lot about the birds and what they eat, so based on the shape of the beak. So insectivores are generally going to have short, fine beaks like this picture here. Seed eaters are going to have short, broad, or thick beaks like this guy here. Carnivores, our meat eaters, are going to have strong hooked beaks like this. Nectivores are going to need long, thin beaks to get into the flowers that they're going after. And then piscivores, or fish eaters, are generally going to have a long beak with a hook on the end of it as well. Right. Some feeding techniques of birds. Some birds will have a gular pouch, also called a throat pouch. Pelicans use their pouch to scoop fish up. Frigate birds use their pouch to attract a mate, and this pouch can also be used to release heat. All right. Another feeding technique is the plunge dive. This is when the bird flies above the water to spot fish and then pulls its wings back to plunge into the water to catch the fish, like you see in these pictures here. Right. Skimmers will fly along the surface of the water with its bill open, and when the bill is touched by a fish, then it will snap shut to collect the bird. And you might see both this and the plunge dive technique when you're out at the beach and watching birds. All right. The next up is the canopy feeding. This is when the bird will bring its wings up over its head and create a shadow over the water. The fish will think it's in a hiding place, but then the bird can also see much easier when it's in the shadow versus in the light area. Then there's nectar feeding, which is hummingbirds. They are going to have long straw-like beaks to suck the nectar out from flowers. They're the only birds that can fly backwards, and they must eat every 15 minutes. And they're very important to plants because they help with pollination. So, and we do have hummingbirds around here during certain parts of the year that if you put out nectar for them in a feeder, you should be able to see them. Right. For feeding technique, the next feeding technique rather is the impels, which is when they'll put food on thorns and barbed wire fences as a method of storing food. So you can see that here. It's kind of gross. Right. Moving on to the digestive system of birds. Birds cannot chew their food, but they do have a crop, which is a structure located at the lower end of the esophagus in which food is stored and moistened. Birds will swallow food and store it in their crop. The food from there is then passed into the stomach, and then the food passes into the gizzard from there. The gizzard is where the food is ground up with the previously swallowed stones, and it will pass it back to the true stomach. Right? Because they lack teeth, the birds swallow stones or grit to help aid in digestion, and all birds have gizzards, but not all will swallow stones or grit. Some of them will. The stones will help grind the food in the gizzard. Right. Moving on to courtship. Courtship includes colorful feathers, songs, dances, aerial displays, postures, or calls. Males do this to attract a mate. Generally, the sequence of courtship includes a territory defense and a song, a mate attraction display, courtship feeding, and a selection of a nesting site. For nest, they have a brood patch, is a patch of featherless skin that is visible on the underside of birds during the nesting season. This patch of skin is well supplied with blood vessels at the surface, making it possible for the birds to transfer heat to the eggs when incubating. And you can see that here in this picture. The purpose of a nest is for the birds to have a protected, warm place to incubate their eggs and then to raise their young once they hatch. There are 5 major types of nests. The first is a cavity nest. It's a hollowed out opening in the trunk of a tree, either found naturally in dead trees or purposely made by the birds. The opening is much smaller than the actual nest inside. Chickadees, nuthatches, woodpeckers, and bluebirds all use this kind of nest. The next is the probably most famous of the nests is the cup-shaped nest. This is made from materials such as grass, moss, string, or spiderweb, and the nesting is coarse on the outside of the nest, and then generally softer materials are used to cushion the inside. So sparrows, finches, and hummingbirds make this kind of nest. probably the most popular type of nest around here. Right. Next is the pendulum nest. It's built from mosses and small twigs into a hanging sack-like shape. It's usually suspended from a small tree branch. Kinglets are one type of bird that will do this. Right. Next is the platform nest. I see these a lot when I visit family in Florida on tops of platforms like this. But they're mostly flat and supported by tree limbs, and they're commonly found on the ground in marshy areas or the tops of large dead trees. In Florida, they like to build them on tops of power line poles, and now in some places they've been purposely putting platforms at the top of some poles to entice them to nest there, so it's less dangerous for the bird and for the electrical company. Right? Raptors' nests can be extremely large. Examples of birds include raptors, crows, and some waterfowl. So there's some different pictures of their nest. Right? Right. And then the next one is a spherical shape. It's a globe or ball-shaped nest. It's made of grasses with a single opening. Some will even make an active nest that the bird is using and then make a dummy or fake nest to defer or confuse predators away from the active nest. So marsh wrens will do this, where they build two just to distract a predator. Right. Moving on to eggs. A clutch is a group of eggs in a nest. Eggs will come in many shapes, sizes, and colors. The incubation periods range from a few days to several weeks, depending on the species of bird. Chicks will have an egg tooth to chip at the egg in order to hatch, and the hatching takes a lot of effort and hard work for the chick, and it can take several hours. Right? So this is not on your sheet, but this is a diagram of an egg. You're not going to be tested on this, but just if you're curious of the different parts of an egg, here you go. The shell is the hard calcium carbonate crust covering the protecting the egg. There's an air space, which obviously is going to contain air. The yolk is the part of the egg which develops into an embryo once the egg has been fertilized. And then the white part of the egg is where the nourishment is for the embryo once the egg has been fertilized. You don't need to know the rest of this. All right, baby chicks. There's parochial, which hatch with their eyes open. They're able to walk and swim, and they're covered in down feathers. So chicks, ducks, and gulls are in this group. And then there's altrical, which are hatched with their eyes closed. They're naked, they're helpless, and they're completely dependent on their parents. Examples include robins, cardinals, and most songbirds. So there's some lovely pictures of those guys. Mother and father birds will catch food for their babies. Some parents will swallow the food and store the food in its crop before feeding it to their babies. This helps with the digestion process and when they regurgitate the food into the baby's mouth. They do a lot of the work for them. It's kind of gross. Right? Fledglings. A fledge is a young bird, and once it's acquired its flight feathers. A young bird that has recently fledged but is still dependent on parental care and feeding is called a fledgling. Right. It is the myth that if you touch a baby chick, then the mother will reject it because it can smell humans. Most birds have a very poor sense of smell. If you can see the nest that the baby fell from, then return it to the nest and the parents will still take care of it. Right? Unless it's just a jerk of a parent. Right. That is it for part 2.